Hello and welcome to MS is Chronic. I'm Barney Black and this is Season 3, Episode 2. Our guest in this episode is Trishna Bharadia, who will be familiar to many people across the MS community because of the work Trishna does through her advocacy and patient leadership. Trishna was diagnosed with MS back in 2008. And through her own experiences, she quickly became involved in patient advocacy, and that has led to many pieces of work from patient engagement through publications, peer-reviewed publications. She's received various awards for the work that she's been doing, and Trishna's work takes her right across the world as a patient advocate and a patient leader in terms of multiple sclerosis. But what you'll hear in this episode is, I guess, the motivation behind Trishna's passion for wanting to be an advocate, but also the value that she has been able to give as someone with multiple sclerosis involved in various studies and various organizations and bringing things into a more public awareness space. For example, an obvious one that comes to mind would be the Asian MS, which is a group I didn't know about until I heard Trishna talking about it on a podcast. She was a guest. The conversation could have gone on and on and on because Trishna has so much experience, her depth of knowledge, her passion for what she does, and the involvement she has is wonderful to listen to, and it was a real treat to get to spend the time with Trishna earlier on through the week. So I hope that you really enjoy this episode as much as I did having the opportunity to spend time with Trishna. Her song choice is an absolute belter, and it is definitely a guaranteed toe tapper. And also Trishna does talk about the importance of dance as a health factor in people's lives. I would certainly echo that, not because I can dance, but because I think exercise in general definitely plays a big part in not only physical well-being, but definitely mental well-being. Obviously, there's a chemical benefits, but the reality is that dance can be a lot of fun. It's bound to be something which collectively in a group as well could be very social. I've talked a little bit before with Bev Malcolm and the Scottish Ballet Elevate initiative, where they use ballet as a way to involve people with MS and get them into a social environment, which also includes doing some ballet as part of that interaction. So, Trishna Bharadia, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know her. I look forward to the work that she continues to do and how that evolves. I'll keep everybody up to date as much as I can. And one last thing for me before you listen to the main episode, if you have come to MS is Chronic, please like, share, comment, thumbs up, follow the podcast. That way I can obviously see who's out there and who is getting anything from this to continue to do future episodes. Happy listening. All the best. Trishna Bharadia, thank you very much for joining MS is Chronic. It's an absolute pleasure of mine to have you here. I think from a CV, you're the most extensive. It's fairly comprehensive, the things that you're doing. The one thing I do want to ask you to share, if you would please, is your journey into becoming diagnosed with MS, and then we can maybe see how that leads off into different conversations, if that's okay with you.
Sure. So my experience, my journey with MS, it started probably about 3 years before I was actually diagnosed. Like a lot of people, I had experienced some symptoms which were initially just put down to something else. I'd lost the strength in both my hands. And I had recently started a new job. I was using the computer a lot. It was put down to repetitive strain injury. I had some physio. In time it got better, and I didn't think much of it. But then it was summer 2007. I completely lost the feeling down one side of my body. And initially I thought I had trapped a nerve playing hockey. And because I'm always getting injured and being hit and things. But over the course of sort of 7 to 10 days, what had started out as a small patch on my leg basically spread from my toes all the way up to my shoulder blades. And that was what kind of triggered me going to see the GP. Also a conversation with my uncle, because my cousin had been diagnosed with MS the year before. And he had said, oh, you know what, it could be neurological, go and get it checked out. And in certain ways, I feel I was lucky because I saw a GP who had recently qualified and I think really wanted to cover all bases. So I didn't experience what I know many people experience, which is it'll get better, and and then end up having to go back to the GP multiple times. That didn't happen to me. She immediately referred me to a neurologist, and then I would say I had a pretty quick and pretty standard route to diagnosis. So I had a few MRI scans over the course of, it was about 9 months. I had the lumbar puncture, and then various blood tests, obviously, to rule things out. And within 9 months, I was given the diagnosis of relapsing MS. And so I would say in certain ways I was very typical. In other ways, maybe not, because I know we'll probably go into this, but MS is very much seen as a white person's disease, so Caucasian people. And so it wasn't something that was well known within the Asian community. I'd known a couple of people with MS over the years, but the people that I had known were very, very severely affected. And I was working full time. I was playing competitive league hockey. I was 28. I was still very much living a really full and busy life. And up until that point, had always been healthy. So it was, in certain ways, it was a shock. In certain ways, it was a relief, because I felt like, okay, I now know what we're dealing with. Okay, we can now put a plan in place. But that diagnosis I would say it wasn't conveyed to me in the best way. I was basically told, you have MS, it's life-changing, it's neurological, it can be disabling. I was given a list of, at that time, 4 disease-modifying therapies, which I was then eligible for. So we're talking about a time, so this was back in 2008, when there was only 5 disease-modifying therapies available. And I was only eligible for 4 of them, because at that time, so Tysabri was second line. And so I was given this list and told to come back in 2 weeks and tell the neurologist what I wanted to go. Yeah, which one do you want to go on? And I wasn't signposted to any information, any organizations. I didn't know what support was out there. It was very much, here's your diagnosis. Okay, now you're on your own. And that's what prompted me really to get into advocacy, because I felt like if I'd had this kind of experience, then other people must also be experiencing the same thing. I thought, well, this isn't right. Myself and my family went through a very steep learning curve within, I would say, that first year. trying to learn everything that there was to learn about MS and what services were available, what information was out there, what support we could access. And it was also a time when we were obviously trying to deal with, I was having acute relapses. I was trying to get used to a new disease modifying therapy, experiencing side effects, etc., etc. So that really sort of spurred me into action, so to speak. That, along with the experience of being a South Asian, being diagnosed with a condition that isn't well known within the Asian community. There's a lot of stigma and prejudice attached to being diagnosed with a chronic condition. And people don't talk about chronic illness and disability within the Asian community. It's swept under the carpet. There's this assumption that you're kind of damaged goods, that you've done something bad in a former life, karma's come to get you. And so I really also want to sort of raise awareness and help people to understand what MS is, what kind of support is out there, and that's what got me involved in Asian MS. So yeah, that's how it all started.
There's loads to unpack there. Where do I want to start? You mentioned your cousin had MS.
Yeah.
I don't know how close you were to your cousins. I've got cousins I'm close to and some not so much, but was that useful when you went to see the GP? Was the family history part of helping maybe getting a bit more of a thorough investigation into your symptoms before diagnosis?
Yeah, I think it was, because it was one of the first things that I mentioned. It was also helpful because when my cousin was diagnosed, particularly my mum, she had started to sort of compile this kind of folder of information that she thought might be useful. Little does she know that a year later that I would need to use it. I think it's also been useful understanding the family history, because 3 years after I was diagnosed, my identical twin was diagnosed with MS, and she was much more aware of, I would say, identifying symptoms very early on. And then I would say probably about 4 or 5 years ago, another of my cousins was also diagnosed. So, and then my younger sister lives with another autoimmune condition. So she lives with inflammatory bowel disease. So it's been, I think, having what we now know as a family history of autoimmune conditions, I think has made me even more, it made me want to be even more open, because I think it's really important that we do talk about these things. We are aware, particularly within Asian families. Often we can't go back any further than maybe our grandparents. So my grandparents were the ones who emigrated to the UK. And so we have their medical records, and even there's kind of a balance, because even in that generation, they also didn't talk about medical stuff. So there's still a lot that we didn't know. But there is no way that I can go any further back than my grandparents. And so I want to make sure that the future generations do understand the importance of, being open, talking about, their health, because that can help them to essentially identify symptoms much earlier and then get help much earlier, which we know leads to better outcomes. It just does. So this is something which, I've been very open with the family about diagnosis. And also, I think it's helped sort of other people within the family to sort of come forward and be open. My dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2021, and I think seeing how I've been so open and the benefits that that has brought meant that he's been very open about it as well. So yeah, it's something which I think people understand the importance. They don't necessarily find it easy, but that's where I say, well, I think the more that we talk about it, the easier it should become.
I agree, and everything you described there, I'd actually written a question down. I must have written it down on a different bit of paper, or maybe I thought to write the question down. I don't know. About with the work that you're doing, and I see. I'm not as I get involved locally with the local MS group in Perth where I live, but that's really about it. Apart from doing this kind of stuff, although I've got involved with Shift MS recently as a buddy, so I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, I see an overlap with the work that you're doing, predominantly with MS at the core, but other conditions naturally fall into the way people think, or how they'll respond, or how open they may be, or how confident they might be in asking for support or advice, or knowing what to ask, or knowing where to go and ask for advice. Have you found that, I've kind of jumped ahead a little bit already, but have you found that with the work that you've done, that there are natural overlaps? And whilst it's MS is your key focus, I suspect it's not the only condition that you've been involved with or had some insight into.
Yeah, absolutely. So my advocacy started out in MS, obviously, but it's exactly what you said. I started to, when I was, the more work that I was doing within MS, I also started to get to know other patient advocates in other disease areas. And there was so much overlap. There was so much which was in common. And that's what got me into the sort of the more holistic patient engagement piece, and then led me into working in different disease areas. So I've worked in, oncology, respiratory, I've worked on, other neurological conditions, so Alzheimer's, spinal cord injury. I've done some work in MND. That's because there are these overarching, what I would say, challenges and opportunities within those patient communities. So things around communicating with healthcare professionals, making sure things are in plain language, accessing healthcare, awareness and knowledge of clinical trials, and getting involved in research and also the design of research, diversity, equity, and inclusion in research and patient engagement, making sure that people are aware of the information, the support, and the services that are available through, for instance, patient groups and charities. There is so much that we have in common, and that we can also learn from each other when it comes to the different patient communities. And I've loved that, and I've loved being able to also bring to organizations like pharmaceutical companies, like medical publishers, like medical communications agencies, being able to bring all those different perspectives together so that they can also see there is commonalities. You might be working in a specific disease area, but what can we learn from other patient communities? So they say that the patient advocacy movement really started in HIV, but it's grown. And, particularly in Western Europe, North America, we have such a, what I would say, sophisticated and mature patient advocacy landscape now, that is not just about disease areas, it's also about geographies. Because, in places like Latin America and Africa, some places in Asia, they're now looking towards what we're doing in Europe and North America and saying, hey, you know what, we need a voice too, and what can we learn from, from those regions in order to implement similar things and advocate for ourselves and patient communities in the regions that they're living in.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a group called Snowdrop, which is on the west of Scotland in Argyll and Sutherland. You might have seen them on Twitter. And they started the thing as a multiple sclerosis support group, but it's became multifaceted. It works across different symptoms, different conditions. They still, and I suppose there's probably a need where you still have to have a multiple sclerosis space or whatever the neurological condition might be, because that can sometimes be very specific. But my hope is, and I'm only just kind of scratching the surface of these things, but my hope is that the common ground is understood and it's spotted, and that we don't lose time or input because of the different silos that can be worked in.
Yeah.
Because I guess even at a local community level, I think sometimes groups can get very protective about it's our group, and there's a bit of preciousness sometimes, which is understandable, but actually there's more to be done by sharing and being more open, which I don't know if that actually links to the Asian MS and having set that up, but I think discrimination comes in all kinds of levels, and sometimes it's completely unconscious and not intended, but people, because they don't live it, they don't see it. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that certain groups end up on the sidelines or not even involved at all. But I was really interested when I heard you talking about Asian MS, because I hadn't heard of it until I listened to one of the podcasts you were a guest on, and I go on the MS Society page weekly.
Yeah.
Now, there's probably no reason for me to know about Asian MS personally, but in the group in Perth that I'm in, it's predominantly a white group. In fact, I think it's absolutely a white group. So there's no real, what's the word? There's no real mix of people.
Yeah.
We're all pretty much from the same kind of backgrounds. But I would suspect in Perth, or certainly Perth and Kinross, which is a pretty decent region size, that there must be different people out there that are either got their own groups to go to that point about there's a group over here and there's a group over here, but actually if we brought them together, there's strength in numbers. Anyway, sorry, I've gone off on a tangent.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, because you make a very good point. Because it's about recognizing our differences and celebrating our commonalities. Because yes, we all have MS. One of the most frequent questions I get asked about Asian MS is, well, why do the Asians need a separate group? And I say, well, it's not that we're separate. We work, and we work with in partnership with lots of other groups. We're embedded within the MS Society, and we're actually welcome to everyone. Anyone who wants to join Asian MS. You don't have to be Asian. You just have to be understanding of the reasons why we exist.
Yeah.
And then I say to people, well, if you're a woman who has MS, or you're a man who has MS, there are certain things which are specific to being a woman who has MS, or being a man who has MS, or being diagnosed as a teenager, or being diagnosed as a younger person, somebody who is older who has MS. Things around. So, for instance, we very much talk about as a young adult, some of those specificities are things around, for instance, family planning, careers.
Yeah.
If you're an older person, say an older woman with MS, how do you manage MS along with menopause, for instance, or retiring, financial planning for the future, etc. Well, if you're Asian, then that's the same thing. There are certain things which are specific around being Asian and your experience, and how that affects your experience of living. I'll start that again. Being Asian and how that affects your experience of being diagnosed with and living with MS. So I've already mentioned there's a lack of awareness. So a lot of people within the Asian community just don't know what MS is, aren't aware of it, that can lead to delays in diagnosis because people aren't aware of the symptoms. We actually don't even know how many Asian people in the UK have MS. On the Indian subcontinent, MS is actually classified as a rare disease because of the prevalence of it. But we do know that if you were born and brought up in this country, in the UK, then your risk of developing MS is actually more or less the same as the general population. There's also things, you know, if you're, let's say, Caucasian, white, British, and your first language is English, you don't have language barriers in terms of being able to explain to your potentially your friends and family about what you're going through. You know, when I was diagnosed, so my Punjabi and Gujarati, which is what my mum and my dad speak, I mean, I can understand the gist. My speaking is rubbish. And so I wasn't able to communicate and explain to extended members of my family what I was going through, because that had to be done in one of the Asian languages. There's also things around, like I said, blame culture. You know, I've had Asian people tell me that MS is my own fault, that it's karma, that God is punishing me and my family for having done something bad in a former life. There's stigma and prejudice because being diagnosed with something like MS can really challenge some of the cultural ideals that are really held still very precious by the Asian community. So there's still a lot of importance placed on getting married and having children and being able to run a household, and particularly if you're a woman, being the perfect daughter-in-law, sister-in-law, daughter, wife, etc. And even choosing treatment and care can be really challenging because, you know, for instance, within the Asian culture, doctors are really revered. You know, they're put on a pedestal and really they're not to be questioned. Well, that actually challenges how, you know, how we've been, I think, how we're moving towards actually within the UK of shared decision making. So, you know, that can be a challenge. We know that Asians and other, and the Black community and other minority ethnic groups are severely underrepresented in clinical trials, in clinical research. So even when it comes to choosing treatments, how do we know that those treatments are going to work as effectively in us as they do in the white majority, which is what makes up the bulk of clinical trial participants? So there's all these things which, when somebody says to me, well, why do Asians need their own group? Well, there's a whole list of reasons why we need to be working towards addressing some of these challenges. And that can only be done from within, because it's, you know, it wouldn't be, it just wouldn't, I think, be as effective or right if somebody like you, as a white person who has absolutely no experience of the challenges that are faced by, you know, by Asians who are being diagnosed with MS, to come in and say, well, I think this is what you should be doing, and this isn't right, and why are you holding these thoughts and beliefs, and why is this happening? It needs to come from within. And it was very much so. Asian MS was set up actually before I got involved. It was set up by basically two people, two Asians who I think they met at an MS Society event. And when they saw each other, they were just like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only Asian person who has MS. And so that's how it started, because it was very much about finding somebody who understood some of those very specific challenges. And so, yeah, it's gone from strength to strength. I've now been involved with Asian MS in some capacity or another for 16 years. I've been diagnosed for 17.
Yeah.
And it very much is one of my greatest passions, because I know how important it is to be able to, like I said, challenge to address these challenges from within the community itself.
It's not funny, but it's funny is the way I'll phrase it, in terms of I like to think I'm kind of aware, and when I go to the Perth groups, there's a couple of women. There's one guy, he has his mobility scooter. Basically, disability is something which I've become more aware of, but it's only one level. You know,
Yeah.
the Asian MS is another level. I was going to ask, actually, with the work that you've done with everything, but obviously Asian MS being a part of the MS Society pages and things, and bringing people together from the same community. Have you spotted any other communities or any other minorities that you think maybe need to be given a similar kind of lift in terms of the profile, or the people that would benefit being aware of?
So there's a number of groups which have now been set up that support the Black community who have MS. So you've got Talks with MS, the Nerve and Mind Multiple Sclerosis. The Shame Project has also been going on for a while. You've also got a group called GEMS, which is aimed at the Jewish community who has MS. You've got Mutual Support, which is a group that supports people in the armed services who are diagnosed with MS. Because again, so if you're in the armed services and you're diagnosed with something like MS, there are certain things where, you know, if, for example, you have to retire, for instance, you might lose your accommodation, because it might be that you're being housed within, you know, within barracks, for instance. So that's specific to the armed forces. You've got MS Together and obviously Shift MS as well, which is aimed at younger demographics. So there's, and I also, I'm pretty sure there's some groups that are now being set up which are specific to people who have progressive MS as well, and people who've got more advanced stages of MS, because that also brings with it its own challenges. And so there's all these, yes, whilst we all have MS, yes, there are also all these specificities which do require what I would say these, you know, particular groups, so that you can focus and concentrate on the things which are important to those groups. There's two wonderful Facebook groups. So one of them I'm not a part of because I don't qualify, but one is called it's mums, MUMS, and it's specifically for mums, either people who women who are looking to have children who have they have MS, or mums with MS. My twin sister is a part of that group and is always raving about just how wonderful that group is. There's also a really good Facebook group which is MS in Work, and again, it's a community. It's actually run by somebody who has MS herself, and she's an HR professional. And again, it's just a wonderfully supportive group for people who are in a specific situation, stage of life. You know, they're still working, and they have, you know, they might have questions around, you know, how do I continue working with MS? They might be facing discrimination at work. They may not be sure of what their employment rights are, etc., etc. And so there's all these, what I would say, little niches, which I think is wonderful, because it does mean that you're also able to get very, very targeted support. There is targeted support out there. And I think social media and the internet has been brilliant for that, because it means that, you know, geography it's not a barrier.
Yeah, yeah. Visibility is really important. That's the thing you made me think about there, is the visibility of the thing you're looking for. Definitely social media has made it easier. So as soon as you put in a word of something that you think of, well, that's going to bring up something hopefully close to what you're looking for. And if not, you just keep going. But you reminded me, when I was in O2, I did a little one-to-one with a guy whose mum had MS, and we shared it on the intranet in the inside of the business. And then a member of the senior team reached out to me to say that she was really grateful for what I think it must have been an MS week or something. We did it anyway, and because she had been diagnosed with MS, but she hadn't told anybody at this point, apart from I think her immediate family. And I was quite taken aback and pleased there was somebody else out there working in the business, but she didn't know where to go. She had no idea. And then from the chat that I'd had with this lad about his mum and everything that he'd been through, and he talked about various groups and organizations, she began to get some confidence about, okay, there's a place I can go, there's someone I can speak to. And I don't know, maybe I do take things for granted. Maybe I'm not as aware as I sometimes like to think I am. But I think there's definitely a need for people to do the things that you're doing, because you've got to try and create a public space for it.
Yeah.
You need to try and create, from my own experience, having seen the things that you've been doing and come across the work that you've done, I think by making it available and reaching out to so many different strands and different groups of people, it's the best way for people to be able to see there's something else out there. Because to go back to a point you mentioned as well about the doctor's experience that you had, I think a lot of people could resonate with here's your diagnosis, here's your options, we'll see you in a month. And you kind of leave the doctor's room having only heard half the conversation and thinking, right, okay, what? MS? What is that? Because I struggled with MS for a bit in terms of, I kept saying it was ME. I kept saying I've got ME to myself. And I then used to blame the MS for saying I had ME. You know, I just put it down to cognitive things. And it wasn't. I just hadn't grasped it. I hadn't kind of digested it. And then slowly but surely I stumbled across the support that was out there. Because it is there, but you don't know what you don't know,
I don't know. So I spoke to somebody and she'd had MS for well over 10 years. And when I spoke to her, the conversation went a certain way. And I had said, oh, obviously it's all to do with the nerves, isn't it? And she said, huh, what? And I said, well, MS, it's all to do with the nerves, isn't it? And she said, I always thought MS was a muscular condition, because MS had affected her limbs. Nobody had explained to her, well, why was it? She had had MS for over 10 years and did not know it was a neurological condition. And this is really where I think healthcare professionals, so we shouldn't expect I mean, we know the healthcare system is under a lot of pressure. You don't get much time with your healthcare professional with the NHS, etc., etc. However, I think it's their role, if they don't have the time in clinic to do all the, all of the explaining. I think obviously they do need to be explaining the basics. That just goes without saying. But they need to know what other support is out there and direct people to the charities, to the patient groups, to the support services. I speak to so many people who don't know, things around just about the day-to-day living. So, what help is available from the council, or that they can even go to the council for help for things like, putting your wheelie bin out, that you can get onto the priority services register for your utilities. So if your electricity goes out, then you can access support. The sunflower lanyard scheme for invisible illnesses. So when you're traveling, you can access support even if you haven't booked special assistance. all of these things are the things which help people live day to day, because at the end of the day, most of us will see our neurologist and MS nurse probably once a year, maybe once every 6 months, depending on if you're on a DMT that requires regular monitoring or you have to go in for infusions, etc. But all the rest of the time, we're more or less on our own. Now, I'm not saying that the healthcare professionals should be there all the time for us, because that's just not practically possible. But if they know about what's out there, they can direct people and say, this is where you can go. I come across lots of people who don't even, who don't even realize that they're meant to, that some of the organizations that they're meant to inform if they've been diagnosed with MS. Lots of people who have critical illness insurance, for example, and there's a time period in which you have to inform them, and lots of people don't even realize or think about it. And by the time they've realized, or somebody has said, have you informed your critical illness insurer? And that time period's gone. These are the things which, practically on a day-to-day basis can really help someone. Like I said, I'm not expecting the healthcare professionals to be able to do it, but, that's where they should be signposting people to.
I agree. The health service, my own personal experience, just recently this week, my mother had a fall. She broke a bone in her hand. Dealing with the hospital up here, Perth and Dundee's been great. But you can see the strains. You can see the creaks, hear the creaks and see the strains. But there's definitely a need to have a kind of almost like a dummy's guide to MS. There's a few things that you really should know as a starter for 10, and then signpost people to more information if they want to dig deeper and dig deeper.
And I think now in the era that we're living in, so particularly when it comes to treatment choice, there is so much choice now, particularly if you have relapsing MS, there is so much choice for disease modifying therapies, but there's decision tools out there. Both the MS Trust and the MS Society have online decision tools to help people kind of hone down on, okay, what's important to me? What do I need from my treatment? So I'm not necessarily saying the neurologist has to sit down and have a 1 hour long conversation, taking somebody through all the pros and cons and things, but send them to the decision tools. That will at least help them narrow down their options, and then they can have a conversation.
Oh, honestly, even still, I guess I'm an old hand at the Tecfidera dimethylfumarate has been my choice, but I still struggle with it. I still struggle with, am I taking the right thing? Is it the thing I want? So even somebody as long down the road as I am having uncertainty. I mean, I can't really remember what it was like in 2017 when I got diagnosed, how I felt. I think I just kind of accepted it and like, that's what we'll do. It was very, very kind of okay. It wasn't a relief. Some people will say now they know what it is and all that kind of stuff. But that whole signposting would have helped, because I relied on YouTube. I relied on just searching for stuff, because I didn't have anybody at the time that I knew of. I didn't have anybody at the time that I could have a chat with outside of the doctor or the neurologist, which I knew was going to be by appointment every so often. And you kind of you get sucked into a rabbit hole, I guess. I don't know if you did, but you really find yourself just constantly looking at things, and you think just half an hour and then it's 11 o'clock at night and I better stop this and go to bed. I'll do it again tomorrow. I'm going to, the other thing that you mentioned that it made me think about, even the type of diagnosis. You talked about progressive multiple sclerosis and relapsing. That's a whole different kind of conversation as well, because you're dealing with two different strains of a very similar condition, and it's that as well.
And that's disputable now. So there is a move. So there is a school of thought which is being moved more towards that actually MS is one disease, and that it's just it's different phases of the same condition. So without going into too much about the history and things like that, the different types of MS was very much a construct to be able to get disease modifying therapies licensed and to be able to prescribe them. And now that we know more in terms of the mechanics of MS, there are many key opinion leaders out there, so top neurologists, and there was discussion at ECTRIMS in 2024. So ECTRIMS, for those people who may not know, is the biggest MS scientific congress in the world. And there was discussions around whether we actually need to do away with these terms of relapsing MS, secondary progressive, primary progressive. So who knows, 10 years from now, we might not even have those terms anymore.
That's interesting. I hadn't heard that. See, there's so much information. I could talk to you for hours. So much insight. I'm going to look into that. That's really interesting, because I guess there's a bit of debate about that from the various camps.
There is. There's some pros and cons. If you talk to some people within the MS community, some people think that there's some advantages to having distinctions. But then also, in particularly, so maybe not as much now because you've got more treatments coming through the pipeline for secondary progressive, but it used to be once you were classed as secondary progressive, your access to DMT stopped because they hadn't been tested in SPMS, and there wasn't anything that had been proven to work in SPMS. So sometimes neurologists would be reluctant to give a diagnosis of SPMS and say you had actually gone into SPMS, because that would mean that you then wouldn't have access to DMTs. So there's all kinds of, it's not easy. It's a complex topic, complex discussion. All I would say is probably watch this space, because it is an ongoing discussion. And like I said, who knows, 10 years from now, we may not be talking about these different types of MS.
Oh, interesting. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to look into what information is available on that just now. I'm really conscious of time. It's just flown by the last 50 minutes. But I can't talk to you without
I know what you're going to say.
Well, maybe, but you're probably right. Strictly Come Dancing.
Yes.
Yeah.
What about
obviously
it?
a moment in the limelight. But you were kind of nominated for that. It wasn't just a case of you were in the right. Well, I guess you were in the right place at the right time. But there was a purpose for you actually being one of the people that were chosen to go on that. So a little bit about that, and then a little bit about actually the whole Strictly experience.
So yes, so I was nominated. The people at the BBC and Strictly Come Dancing program, they decided that for the first time ever, they were going to open up the Strictly Come Dancing doors. So if people are listening to this outside of the UK, then Strictly Come Dancing is the UK version of Dancing with the Stars. And they were going to open up the Strictly Come Dancing doors to non-celebrities for the first time ever. And it was going to be done as a special 4-part series in aid of Comic Relief, which is one of the BBC's charities. And they were asking for members of the public to nominate individuals who they thought were essentially deserving of having the most wonderful, surreal, just amazing experience. So they were looking for super fans of the show, and I'm a huge fan of Strictly Come Dancing, and I sit down every Saturday night when it's on and watch it. I love dancing myself. So dancing, I came to dancing late, in that it's something that I'd always wanted to do but never had the confidence to. I've always been a hockey player, so field hockey for people who are listening, maybe from the Americas, and continued to play competitively post-diagnosis for about, I would say probably about 8 years post-diagnosis, but then ended up having to give it up because my MS got to the point where I was basically a danger to myself on the pitch. I kept getting hit. I wasn't able to move out of the way of flying balls quickly enough. I kept having to call my parents from A&E on a Saturday afternoon saying, can you come and pick me up? I got hit again. I've had stitches. And yeah, it got to a point, it was actually, you know, I had a conversation with my dad whilst I was having my chin stitched up. And my dad, bless him, my dad is in his mid-70s. He still plays competitively. He plays internationally. In his mid-70s, he plays internationally masters hockey. And we're a hockey family. So hockey is literally, it's in our blood. All my sisters play, like I said, my cousins, uncles. But we had a serious conversation and it was just like, I think it's time for you to kind of, hang up the hockey stick, think about doing something else. And I'd actually had a conversation with a neuropsychologist at a MS conference a few years earlier. And she had said to me, Trishna, I know how much you love playing hockey, but you have to face the reality you may not be able to play it in the future because of your MS. So you need to start looking for something else just in case. And that had prompted me to try out different things. And I tried out some Zumba classes. Absolutely fell in love with it because, I'd never had the confidence to dance, but Zumba is very much about building up people's confidence. You don't have to get the steps right. You can go at your own pace, which was brilliant for my MS. And mentally, it was great because I was increasingly, with my hockey, I was increasingly feeling a bit like I was failing myself and my team, because in a team sport, you have to keep up with other people. You know, you're not in control of the pace at which that match is being played. So I'd already started doing Zumba, fell in love with it, had watched Strictly for years. And so my sister, it's a very long-winded way of saying that my sister saw when they basically put this call out and thought, oh my goodness, Trishna would absolutely love to do this. And they were looking for people who had, overcome adversity, done lots of charity work, given back to the community. She nominated me. There was over 11,000 nominations and 6 people were chosen. And I found out what I now know was a fake Zumba DVD recording, which was filmed in Hammersmith in London one Friday night in November. And my younger sister is actually a Zumba and inclusive dance instructor. And she had said to me, I saw on the Zumba instructor's Facebook page that there's this instructor who's recording a Zumba DVD and they're just, looking for other instructors and people who do Zumba to come along and, be part of this recording. Shall we go? And I was like, it's Friday night. I'm tired. I'd had a long week at work. I really didn't want to go out. Both my sisters managed to drag me out. Before we left, my sister said to me, she said, you know what? She said, you should really put some makeup on. You might not be able to because I was just planning to go and hide at the back. And she said, they might have ideas about where they want to place you and stuff. She said, just put a bit of makeup on. I'm so glad she said that. And then, I was surprised. Natalie Lowe, who was then a long-time Strictly professional dancer, and Lewis Smith, who is an Olympic gymnast and actually won Strictly when he took part. They were there at the surprise. It was just amazing. It's a totally surreal experience. And then I spent 4 months filming, dance training, working full time, trying to manage my MS. Not entirely sure how I managed to do it, but I had some incredible support around me. So my family, the BBC production crew. I was paired with Ali Ash Skronianits, and he was just so supportive and so brilliant. And then the other contestants as well, because all the other contestants who were taking part, they also had their own stories and their own, you know, challenges that they were having to overcome. So one lady has 2 now adult children who are on the autistic spectrum, one of whom has pretty challenging needs. He's non-verbal, and there's a lot of challenges around his care. And you know, she often, you know, gets no more than sort of 3-4 hours of sleep a night. And so when it came to understanding fatigue, she was, you know, I totally get it. There was somebody else who, so there was a former Marine, and he had to have one of his legs amputated as a result of some of the operations he'd taken part in when he was in Afghanistan. And, you know, so he had his own challenges, you know, trying to learn how to dance with a prosthetic. And so it was an amazing experience. I got to meet some amazing people. I learned a lot about myself, because it was probably the most challenging thing that I've done physically, mentally, and also emotionally as well. Mm-hmm. And that's coming from someone who decided post-diagnosis. So I'd been diagnosed for probably several years. And I decided, oh, you know what? Now's the time. I'm going to try how to snowboard. And that was really, really difficult. But doing Strictly was harder than snowboarding. And yeah, it was just, it gave me a glimpse into a world that I would never have had the chance to experience. You know, yeah. I don't really have much time for myself. That's partly my own fault, because I love what I do so much that I do work like all the time. But even things like, you know, the beautiful dresses, having someone do my hair and makeup, learning, you know, I got to dance every day, and that in itself was, I got to dance every day, and that in itself was just, it was so brilliant. And then I also got to have these amazing experiences. So when we were doing, for instance, when we were doing the results show, that was being, so the results of the competition, I say competition, all of us kind of felt we'd already won anyway. It was being announced on Comic Relief Night, which was being filmed that year at the Palladium. So I was stood on the most iconic theatre stage in the UK, looking out to like the audience. And I was just like, oh my God, I am on the stage at the Palladium. Met Orlando Bloom in the corridor. When we were doing promotion for the show, a group of us were appeared on the One Show, which is, you know, early evening show in the UK. And when I arrived there, I received a text from one of the other contestants who was already there. And she said, oh, just to warn you, Trishna, there's a lot of crowds outside the BBC studio, because apparently the Backstreet Boys have been doing an interview in Radio 1, and there's loads of girls out there. I was just like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in the same building as the Backstreet Boys had been. So that, I mean, that in itself, that was just brilliant. I get out the car, toddle off to the building, get into the reception foyer area, who comes out? It was the Backstreet Boys. And I was just like, oh my goodness, all my teenage dreams had just come true. And I got a picture with them and they were lovely. And, you know, those are the kinds of things you can only just say, oh my goodness, pinch me. Is this real? And then as a result of that, so yes, all of that was brilliant. However, the most amazing thing was the fact that it was probably the biggest platform we have ever had in the UK to raise awareness about MS. Strictly Come Dancing is probably, and it is, the most popular family entertainment show in the UK. And I was someone who was able to go on, talk about what MS is, raise awareness, not just to somebody with MS, but also an Asian person with MS. And it started conversations. I had, you know, people contacting me over social media. My parents were being stopped in the supermarket, you know, to, you know, ask, oh, how's your daughter doing? Or, oh, it's so brilliant that what your daughter did because, you know, my son, my daughter, my friend has just been diagnosed and it's helped us to have conversations. And that's the legacy, I think. And that's why, again, I feel it's so important that if you have the opportunity to use a public platform to tell your story, then, and you're comfortable doing that, then absolutely go for it, because you don't know where it will lead to, what conversations it will start, and who you might be helping. You know, I don't know the half or even a smidgen of the conversations that might have been started. I only know of the people, you know, who contacted me. You know, I received a just a wonderful message from somebody who said that they'd been wanting to raise money for charity, and because they had seen me on the show, they actually decided to raise money for their local MS therapy centre. This was actually up in Scotland, for their local MS therapy centre. So, you know, things like that are what come out of having that public platform. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. I absolutely loved doing it. I would say if people want to know more about what it was like and, you know, see some photos and things like that, go onto my website. It's very easy. It's TrishnaBharadia.com. And I have a whole page dedicated just to Strictly.
You have, I've seen it. And I will also add it to the links to this particular episode, Trishna. You preempted a couple of questions which I had. I think that the first one is, you're no longer looking in the telly, you're in the TV. You know, you are part of the show, and that's got to be a completely different experience. And a lot of the times, I nearly, when I was emailing you yesterday, I think I took it out of the message, but I began to give a little bit of background to me and about how I'd rather not have MS. However, it has opened up opportunities to meet people that I would never have met, or even experiences which I would never have had. And that's not saying that it's a fair substitute. It's just that the situations that MS has created, some of them are amazing. Some of them have just been, for you, living teenage dreams.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I wouldn't. The thing, I wouldn't wish MS or any like health condition on anyone. However, I believe everything happens for a reason. Now, MS basically sparked or prompted me to go on a certain path, which has led me to, yes, having some amazing experiences, completely changing my career, meeting some wonderful, amazing people who I can now call friends, and who have really helped me to understand better about living or trying to live a more positive life despite, or the challenges that you might face. It's very much changed my outlook on a lot of things, and it's all down to being diagnosed with MS. And I just wouldn't change it. I wouldn't. And like I said, I believe everything happens for a reason, and so it's got me to this point, and I'm very lucky to be able to say that I'm where I feel I'm meant to be, and I have MS to thank for that.
I can always say that, having looked into your background and the work that you're doing and things, because of MS, you are having a positive impact on probably thousands of lives, and that's pretty impressive. That's pretty powerful. So well done, you. Yeah, it's really impressive. I've got a couple of quick questions. Well, I think they're quick questions. One of them is definitely a quick question. So on that path you were talking about that you're on, what's next? What's the kind of key goals in the short term?
I think there's a lot of challenges right now within the healthcare system. And so I think the short-term goals is to continue to advocate for better access to support services and information. In terms of the research side of things, I'm really excited at the prospects of precision medicine. So, I would hope that, 20 years from now, somebody is diagnosed with MS and their neurologist can say to them, this is the treatment that I think you should go on because of X, Y, and Z, your, the pathology, the characteristics of your MS, your demographics, and there's so much around genetics research and things like that, which I think we can very much learn again from other conditions, because we're seeing precision medicine being used more and more, for instance, in oncology. So what's there around that? Then there's also the prospects around remyelination, which could potentially help reverse and repair damage that has already been caused and restore function. Those are the two things which I think I'm most excited about when it comes to research. And then continue just advocating for, awareness, support. I really believe that genuinely most people want to help and they do want to support, but they need to be able to understand what you're going through in order to be able to offer that. So how do we do that? Well, we need to continue talking. We need to continue sharing our experiences. And hopefully that means that as people, coming through it, being diagnosed, they won't feel as much of being thrown into the black hole that I felt like I was thrown into way back in 2008, that they do feel like they're being signposted and that there is immediate support out there that they can call upon if they need it.
Perfect. No, I think that's brilliant. Thank you very much. I've got a pages of notes here that I could continue this, but I'm very conscious. Maybe we can pick it up in a few months' time and find out what else has been happening. I have one last question, which all my guests get asked, and it is, if you were to pick a tune, a song that just brings you into a good place, what would it be?
It has to be Whitney Houston, I Want to Dance with Somebody, because it sums up how I feel about dance, but also it's a song that has always picked me up and lifted me. Some of my sort of most cherished moments have involved that song, whether it's people I've been with, or whether it's experiences that I've had, or whether it's events that I've attended. That song is always, I love it. I wish I could sing it as well as Whitney Houston does, but I absolutely do not.
I'm sure you can sing it with as much passion. That's brilliant. That's actually a really uplifting song. So yeah, thank you for that. That will go straight on the MS. Actually, music is chronic playlist is what I've called that. So that will join all the many other choices that are there, all very eclectic and all with personal reasons that people have chosen them. Thank you again, Trishna. Honestly.
And can I just add one more thing? And this is around dance. I think dance is one of the most inclusive activities that people can do in order to keep moving, keep fit, and also is fantastic for your mental health. So dance, whatever your mobility level is, there is a way that you can still dance. And I've done inclusive dance classes with people who use wheelchairs, mobility aids, some people who have been paralyzed from the chest down. It is one of the most inclusive activities that people can do. So if you're looking for something that is not just about physical exercise, but it's also about your mental health, look at doing dance. Honestly, really do.
Brilliant. That's it. I thank you very much. Like I say, we could keep going because there's lots of stuff that to dig deeper into, but I've really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for giving up your time.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers. Bye-bye.